Global Affairs daily presents Europe, the 5,000 year story of civilization. A land small in size but vast in history, home to some of humanity's greatest ideas, revolutions, and contradictions. For over 5,000 years, the continent has reinvented itself again and again, rising from Athens, from wars, from renaissances, driven by the restless pursuit of meaning, power, and perfection. This is not just the history of kings or borders. It is the story of civilization itself, of how Europe became the laboratory of modern world. Long before Europe was an idea, it was a geography of myths. In ancient Greece, the story of the gods explained the cosmos. Zeus on Olympus, Poseidon in the seas, and Athena's guarding the city of wisdom. But something revolutionary happened. Reason began to challenge myth. Philosophers like Socrates asked, what is virtue? Plato sought the perfect form behind every shadow. Aristotle observed nature, systematizing knowledge into logic and science. This intellectual awakening became Europe's first identity, not one of empires, but of thoughts. Here in the marble courtyards of Athens, the modern mind was born. And from Greece, the seeds of rational inquiry spread to Rome, to monasteries, to laboratories, shaping how the continent would forever think, argue, and dream. If Greece gives Europe its mind, Rome gave its spine. Its spine. Rome gave it its spine. The Roman Empire was more than an army. It was an idea of order. Roads, laws, citizenship, the framework of civilization as administration. Rome believed in the rule of law, not merely the rule of men. Even in its brutality, it carried discipline, and in its collapse, it left legacy. When Rome fell in 5th century AD, its structures did not vanish. They fragmented, evolved, and became the scaffolding of medieval Europe. The Latin language, Roman law, Christian faith all survived. Europe learned one of its oldest lessons: empires die, ideas do not. Faith and power, the age of Christendom. In the vacuum after Rome, faith became Europe's glue. The church rose not just as a religious institution, but as the continent's moral, intellectual, and political center. Cathedrals soared across cities like stone prayers. Monks copied manuscripts in candlelight, preserving the wisdom of Greece and Rome. The idea of Europe became Christian Europe. But faith brought both unity and division. While cathedrals reached for heaven, crusades burned across deserts, while monasteries taught compassion, inquisitions while monasteries taught compassion, inquisitions hunted heresy. The church defined what Europe should believe, and more importantly, what it should fear. This was the age when belief built beauty and boundaries in equal measure. The Renaissance, when man became his own measure. By the 14th century, something ancient was awakening. In Florence, Venice, and Rome, Europe looked at its reflection and saw promise again. The Renaissance, literally rebirth. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci Michelangelo and Raphael turned faith into form and geometry into grace. Human beings, not saints, became the subject of art and not philosophy. Man is the measure of all things, wrote Protagoras, echoing through the centuries. The Renaissance was not rejection of God, it was rediscovery of humanity. It marked the return of curiosity, dignity, and doubt. For the first time, Europe was not just surviving history, it was creating it consciously. Chapter 5. The Reformation, Faith in Revolt. In 1517, a monk named Martin Luther nailed his thesis to a church door in Wittenberg, and the echo shook all of Europe. The Reformation shattered the Reformation shattered the spiritual monopoly of Rome. What began as a question of faith began a question of power. What commands the soul, the church, or the conscience? From Germany to England, Europe divided Protestant against Catholic, reformers against emperors. Wars followed, but so did awakening. Printing presses multiplied ideas faster than kings could burn them. Individual conscience emerged as a force equal to divine decree. And beneath the conflict, something new was forming, the idea of freedom of thought. Chapter 6. Discovery and Dominion, the World Expands. As Europe debated its soul, it also expanded its reach. Sailors from Spain and Portugal crossed oceans unknown, driven by ambition, faith, and curiosity. They found new worlds and claimed them. From Columbus to Magellan, exploration became conquest. Gold, spices, and slaves flowed into European ports. The Renaissance mind, now armed with compass and cannon, remade global geography. Europe saw itself as the center of the world, and much of the world would come to feel that claim for centuries. The age brought discoveries, yes, but also domination. It was Europe's boldest and darkest chapter in the same breath. Chapter 7. The Age of Reason, Enlightenment, and the Human Mind. By the 17th century, Europe's compass no longer pointed only to the sea, it pointed to the mind. Science challenges dogma. Galileo turned telescopes towards the stars, and Newton turned mathematics into the language of nature. Philosophers like Voltaire, Locke, and Kant ask and Kant. Philosophers like Voltaire, Locke, and Kant ask, what is liberty? What is reason? What is man's duty to himself? The Enlightenment was not one moment, it was the storm of questions. Its thinkers believed that ignorance, not sin, enslaved humanity. From Paris salons to London coffee houses, Europe dreamed of a society guided not by kings or priests but by reasons. Yet beneath the brilliance of thought lay the shadows of revolution. Chapter 8. Revolution and Rebirth. In 1789, Paris erupted and Europe would never be same. The French Revolution was not just a political event, it was a moral earthquake. For the first time, common people challenged centuries of divine hierarchy. Liberty, equality, fraternity was not a slogan, it was a manifesto of modern consciousness. Kings fell, empires shook, the idea of citizenship was born. Europe entered the age of ideology, where belief moved from cathedrals to constitutions. But revolutions rarely end where they began. From Napoleon's rise to the wars that followed, the continent discovered the price of its newfound freedom, a century of permanent change. Chapter 9: The Machine and the Mind. As Europe's politics exploded, its workshops hummed. Coal, steam, and steel ignited the Industrial Revolution. Factories rose where fields once stood. Trains cut through mountains. London, Manchester, Berlin, cities of smoke and ambition became symbols of new era. The machine brought prosperity but also poverty. Children toiled beside iron gears, wealth and misery grew together. Meanwhile, in universities and laboratories, new sciences reshaped understanding. Darwin on evolution, Marx on class struggle, Freud on the mind. Europe was industrializing its thought as much as its streets. Progress was not gentle, it was a storm, and Europe learned that innovation without ethics is a dangerous alchemy. Chapter 10: Empires and Ideas. By the late 19th century, Europe ruled half of the planet. From London to Lisbon, flags fluttered over Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. But beneath this imperial confidence lay rivalries and fear. Nations measured greatness by colonies and cannons. The Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires strained under their own weight. At the same time, science and art reached new heights. Einstein, Nietzsche, Van Gogh, and Wagner, voices that both celebrated and questioned the age of power. Europe stood at its zenith, brilliant, arrogant, and fragile. The storm of modern war was already brewing on the horizon. Chapter 11: The Great War and the Broken World, 1914 to 1945. In 1914, the continent that led thoughts, the world civilization turned its knowledge against itself. World War One, a catastrophe of machines and men. Trenches followed a generation. The war to end all wars ended only in grief. 2 decades later, the unthinkable returned. Fascism rose from Italy to Germany, feeding on despair. World War II engulfed Europe in fire and shadow. From Stalingrad to Auschwitz, from London to Berlin, humanity saw its own abyss. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, Europe lay in ruins, but within that ruin, a seed of renewal was planted. The conviction that peace must be built, not assumed. Chapter 12: Building and Reunion, 1945 to 1991. From the ashes of war, a different Europe emerged. Under the Marshall Plan, nations rebuilt their economies brick by brick. Enemies became partners. France and Germany, once rivals, now architects of a shared future. The European coal and steel community laid the foundation for a continent that chose cooperation over conquest. Meanwhile, a new divide split East and West, the Cold War. Berlin's Wall became the symbol of separation, but also the dream of unity. When that wall fell in 1989, cheers erupted from Prague to Warsaw. For the first time in 1,000 years, Europe stood on the blink of wholeness, not through empires or religion, but choice. Chapter 13: The Age of Integration. The 1990s and 2000s were an era of expansion. The European Union grew from 12 to 27 members. The euro was born, a currency not of kings but of agreements. Europe invested in education, human rights, and science. It sought to be a moral power, a continent of laws, not wars. Yet, unity brought new questions. How much diversity can integration hold? How far can freedom stretch before it splits? The European dream was real but fragile, tested by immigration, identity, and memory. Chapter 14, Crisis and Courage. The 21st century did not grant Europe rest. A financial crisis shook its foundation. The refugee crisis tested its morality. The pandemic tested its resilience. And then came Brexit, the unmaking of a union that once seemed unbreakable. But Europe's strength has always been its ability to argue and endure. Even as borders shift and currencies fluctuate, its core values persist: democracy, dialogue, and dignity. Chapter 15th, The New Frontier, 2022 to 2025 and beyond. In the 2020s, Europe faces another test, the war in Ukraine. Once again, the continent is forced to choose between silence and solidarity. But this time, it responds with unity through sanctions, aid, and resolve. It learns that peace is not a starter, it's a practice. Meanwhile, Europe's youth, led on climate justice, digital innovation, and human rights, the continent of cathedrals and castles now builds its future on data and diversity. The experiment of Europe continues, 5,000 years old, forever unfinished. The epilogue, the idea of Europe. Europe is not just a place on a map, it's an idea. That reason can conquer, fear and diversity can coexist, that memory is worth carrying even when it hurts. From Athens to Berlin, from Florence to Warsaw, Europe remains a conversation across centuries between faith and logic, art and power, past and possibility. Its journey is our journey, a reminder that civilization is never complete, it must be built again every generation. You have been watching Global Affairs Daily. This was Europe, the 5,000-year story of civilization, a chronicle of a continent that once defined the world and still tries to understand itself. Thank you for watching.